All right, we'll do attendance after we get done with this. So what we're going to do today is watch a BBC documentary about blues music. As you'll see, the blues is basically the start of popular music in the US, and the way that blues becomes popular music is really interesting. And this documentary in particular really brings out the way that society and culture can articulate. So, if you didn't see the announcement I sent out last night, these next couple of slides are what I want you to be thinking about and looking for as you watch the documentary. And the first thing we'll do on Tuesday, assuming I remember I said this, is we'll come back to this and kind of talk through some of these questions. Okay, so one piece, and this is just basically the title of the class, Media, Culture, and Society. So one media piece is the record companies and recording studios. Radio stations, TV stations, so these are the channels that get the music from the artist, culture, to society, and technology changes. So I'll just give you an example of what you want to be listening for. At a point in the documentary, they talk about how amplification changed the sound of blues music. So that would be, for our purposes, a media culture articulation. How did changes in guitar technology essentially change the way artists played blues music? That's a media to culture articulation. So what kind of changes resulted from blues music becoming popular, different technology changes, and the way radio stations and television stations capitalized off of blues music. Culture is a pretty straightforward one. You remember, culture are the artists and the art they make, the art they make and the way they make it. So this is where you're going to watch for musical artists. And one thing that's kind of interesting about the documentary is Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones is one of the commentators that comes up pretty frequently, and he talks about how American blues music influenced the Rolling Stones. So if you remember back to the sampling lecture we had at the start of the semester, that would be a culture-to-culture articulation. So how does blues music connect with other types of culture? And how do they influence each other? That'll be a big one, especially towards the end of the documentary. And details about the music. So who plays it, who is the audience for it, and again, what's going to be interesting, this kind of goes in reverse of our normal trend. Blues music, I'm sure you all know, starts out as black Southern music. It moves up to the Midwest. It's performed by black folks for a black audience. But then as it becomes more popular, the audience pretty much turns white. So who are the artists? Who is the audience? And how do they change over time? That's another thing you want to pay attention to. And then finally, society. And I'll give you one really straightforward example of the type of thing you're looking for. The beginning of the documentary talks about how, because of the advances in picking cotton, black folks no longer had jobs in the South, so they moved to Chicago to get into factory jobs in the Midwest. And when they move from the South to Chicago, they bring blues music with them, and then that's where it gets really popular, and that's kind of the start of blues music being popular. So that's an example of changes in society. The way that farming changes, the way that farms work affects people, and as a result, it affects the culture. So before this, the blues is pretty local. and it's pretty community centered. Once they move up to the Midwest, black folks play blues music more. Interestingly, a white owner of a record company recognizes the music, and he's kind of the one that starts selling records and making these artists popular. So that sort of link between the culture and society. And then another thing that comes up towards the end of the documentary is changes in race relations. So, how does blues music change the way people look at race? And how do changes in society, the civil rights movement is in the 60s, so as America becomes more open to civil rights, how does that change who can listen to blues music, who can play it, how it's perceived in society? So what you really want to be looking for are sort of the elements where things change. So kind of some of the standards and then some of the changes.